December 30th, 1610. A winter night in the Carpathian Mountains. Count Georgi Thurzo leads a squadron of soldiers through a snowstorm toward Čachtice Castle. They are going to arrest the wealthiest woman in Hungary. But when they burst through the massive oak doors, something stops them in their tracks. Not guards. Not resistance. A smell. The smell of death so thick that soldiers reach for their swords. Thurzo descends into the dungeons. What he sees there will make him write to the king the next morning with words that tremble with horror. In the stone chambers beneath the castle he finds girls, some still alive, barely breathing, chained to the walls. Others already dead, their bodies thrown like sacks of grain. And in the main hall behind a massive oak table sits a woman in a luxurious velvet gown. She does not flee, does not beg for mercy. She looks at the count with cold blue eyes and asks calmly, "Who gave you the right to enter my home?" This woman's name was Elizabeth Bathory. She is 50 years old. She owns 17 castles. She is a relative of the Polish king. She controls more land than the Hungarian monarch himself. And according to testimony that will soon be given by hundreds of witnesses, she tortured and murdered young girls for 25 years. The numbers vary. Some say 80 victims. Other witnesses name the number 650. If we believe the most terrifying testimonies, Elizabeth Bathory became the bloodiest serial killer in human history. A woman who surpassed Jack the Ripper, Ted Bundy, and all other monsters combined. But here is what nobody tells you. Elizabeth Bathory never stood trial. She was never interrogated publicly. Her name disappeared from official documents for almost 100 years. The King of Hungary forbade even mentioning her in conversations under threat of punishment. When she died 4 years later, she was buried at night without witnesses, without a tombstone, without any honors. Even today, nobody knows exactly where her grave is located. Why was Europe's most terrifying killer hidden instead of being shown as an example to others? What really happened in the dungeons of Čachtice Castle? And the most important question, was Elizabeth Bathory truly an insane murderer? Or did she become the victim of the biggest political conspiracy of the 16th century? There is a version that everything was much simpler. King Matthias II owed Elizabeth enormous amounts of money, debts he could never repay. But if you prove that the Countess is a criminal, then the debts are automatically cancelled, and her 17 castles and thousands of hectares of land transfer to the crown. A perfect way to get rid of a creditor, accuse her of horrific crimes, wall her up in a castle without trial, wait for death, take everything. Some historians today believe that Elizabeth punished her servants no more cruelly than any other aristocrat of that time, that the numbers were wildly exaggerated, that the famous bloodbaths everyone has heard about are a myth created 200 years after her death by writers looking for a good story. But there is another side. Too many witnesses, too many details, too many bodies found that winter evening, servants who escaped from the castle and told horrifying stories years before the arrest, priests who refused to bury girls without explanations of how they died, neighboring villages where young girls disappeared one after another. Can all this be invented for money? Where is truth and where is lies? Who was Elizabeth Bathory, really? A monster who bathed in the blood of innocents, or an aristocrat who became a pawn in a game of kings? Hit like right now so this story reaches more people. Because what you will learn in the next 15 minutes will make you rethink everything you thought about female power, about medieval justice, and about how far a person can go when they are allowed absolutely everything. This is not just a story about a serial killer. This is a story about a system where the rich could do whatever they wanted with the poor, where the life of a peasant girl cost less than a horse, where justice depended not on truth, but on how much gold was in your coffers. And at the center of this system stood a woman who was possibly the most dangerous of all, precisely because she understood the rules of the game better than anyone. August 7th, 1560. Čachtice Castle in Transylvania. A girl is born who will become the most infamous serial killer in history. Her parents, Georgi and Anna Bathory, belong to one of the most powerful families in Hungary. They have everything: titles, castles, armies, land that stretches further than the eye can see. But they also have something else. Something dark that passes through generations like a curse you cannot escape. Here is a fact historians often skip over. The Bathory family was genetically cursed. Inbreeding. Marriages between cousins for centuries led to mental illnesses running through the bloodline like poison in water. Elizabeth's brother suffered from severe schizophrenia. Her uncle Gabor believed he was a wolf and attacked servants on all fours. Her Aunt Clara heard voices that told her to hurt herself. This was not unusual for aristocratic families of the time. Royal blood had to stay royal, even if it meant madness. Little Elizabeth grows up in a world where violence is as normal as breakfast. At age 6, she watches a public execution in the castle courtyard. A Romany man accused of theft. They tie him inside a horse's carcass and sew it shut. The man screams for hours as he suffocates. Elizabeth watches from the window. Her governess tells her, "This is justice. This is what happens to those who take what does not belong to them." The girl does not cry. She does not look away. She watches until the screaming stops. At age 8, Elizabeth speaks 4 languages: Latin, German, Hungarian, Greek. She reads philosophy. She studies astronomy. She is smarter than most men at court, and everyone knows it. But there is another part of her education nobody writes about in the official records. She watches her father punish servants. A kitchen maid drops a plate. Her father orders 20 lashes. A stable boy arrives late. He is locked in a cell without food for 3 days. A washerwoman is accused of stealing a ribbon. They brand her hand with hot iron. Elizabeth watches all of this, and she learns the most important lesson of aristocratic life. Some people are born to rule. Others are born to suffer. And the line between them is absolute. At age 10, something happens that changes everything. A servant girl around Elizabeth's age, maybe 12 years old, is caught stealing bread from the kitchen. She was hungry. Her family was starving. But theft is theft. Elizabeth's mother decides the girl needs to be taught a lesson. They strip her naked in the courtyard in front of everyone. Then they beat her with birch branches until her back bleeds. Elizabeth is ordered to watch. Her mother wants her to understand the price of disobedience. But something strange happens. Elizabeth does not feel pity. She feels something else. Something she cannot name yet. Power. Here is where the story gets complicated. Was Elizabeth born evil, or did her world make her this way? Think about it. From the moment she could walk, she saw violence as normal, punishment as entertainment, human suffering as a tool for control. She was raised in a system where peasants were property, where a noble could kill a servant and pay a small fine, where justice meant whatever the person with power decided it meant. How do you grow up normal in a world like that? How do you learn empathy when nobody around you shows any? At age 11, Elizabeth commits her first act of cruelty. A servant girl spills water on her dress. Elizabeth does not call for her mother. She handles it herself. She slaps the girl so hard the girl falls. Then Elizabeth orders 2 other servants to hold the girl down while she pulls her hair out in clumps. The girl is crying, begging for mercy. Elizabeth feels that feeling again, that rush of power, that knowledge that she can do whatever she wants and nobody will stop her. The servants clean up. The girl is sent away. Nobody mentions it again. At age 12, Elizabeth is engaged. Her future husband is Ferenc Nadasdy. He is 16. He comes from another powerful family. The marriage will unite 2 dynasties, create political alliances, secure land agreements. Nobody asks Elizabeth if she wants this. Marriage is not about love. It is about power. Ferenc is a soldier. He is already famous for his brutality in war against the Ottomans. They call him the Black Knight of Hungary. He earns this name by impaling Turkish prisoners alive, by burning villages, by showing no mercy to anyone who stands against him. Elizabeth hears these stories and she does not flinch. Maybe she even admires him. Here is a man who takes what he wants, who answers to nobody, who understands that power is the only thing that matters. For 3 years, Elizabeth prepares for marriage. She learns to manage a household, to give orders to servants, to handle money and land contracts. But she also learns something else from Ferenc during their courtship. He teaches her new ways to punish disobedient servants. He shows her torture techniques he learned in war. He tells her that fear is the best way to maintain control, and Elizabeth listens. She learns. She absorbs everything like a sponge soaking up water. May 8, 1575. Elizabeth is 15 years old. She marries Ferenc Nadasdy in the most lavish wedding Hungary has seen in decades. 4,000 guests, a celebration that lasts 6 days, rivers of wine, mountains of food. It costs more money than most people will see in 10 lifetimes. Elizabeth wears a gown encrusted with pearls and rubies. She looks like a queen. She feels like a goddess. And on her wedding night, as fireworks explode over the castle, she makes a promise to herself. She will never be weak. She will never be controlled. She will take everything this world owes her. But the real horror has not started yet. The wedding is just the beginning. Because now Elizabeth has her own castle, her own servants, her own domain where nobody can question her. Ferenc leaves for war almost immediately. He will be gone for months at a time fighting the Ottomans on the frontier. And Elizabeth is left alone in Sarvar Castle with absolute power over hundreds of people. No husband to answer to. No parents to supervise her. Just Elizabeth and her servants. And that is when the first girl disappears. 1575 to 1604. These are the years when Elizabeth learns what it means to have unlimited power. Ferenc is almost never home. He is fighting wars, building his reputation, conquering enemies. Elizabeth is alone in Sarvar Castle, managing 17 estates, thousands of servants, entire villages that belong to her family. She is 17 years old and she controls more wealth than some kings. But wealth is not enough. Control is not enough. Something inside her needs more. The first incidents are small. A servant girl breaks a vase. Elizabeth slaps her so hard the girl's ear bleeds. A kitchen maid burns the bread. Elizabeth forces her to hold hot coals in her bare hands. A washerwoman ruins a dress. Elizabeth has her stripped and beaten in the courtyard. These punishments are not unusual for the time. Most aristocrats treat their servants this way. But with Elizabeth something is different. She does not punish and move on. She watches. She lingers. She seems to enjoy the suffering in a way that makes even other nobles uncomfortable. Here is what the historical records show. Between 1575 and 1580, Elizabeth gives birth to 4 children. Anna, Ursula, Catherine, Paul. She is a mother. She runs vast estates. She handles complex financial matters while her husband is at war. By all accounts, she is an effective administrator, smart, organized, capable. The estates prosper under her management. So how does this woman also become a monster? How do you reconcile the caring mother with the torturer? The answer is simpler than you think. Elizabeth does not see a contradiction. In her world, peasants are not really people. They are tools, property. You can love your children and still torture your servants the same way you can love your dog and still whip your horse. The torture escalates slowly over years. By 1585, Elizabeth has assembled a team of helpers. First is Ilona Jo, an older woman who served as Elizabeth's nurse when she was a child. Ilona is completely loyal. She will do anything Elizabeth asks without question. Then there is Dorothea Sentes, a local woman known for her skill with herbs and folk magic. People call her a witch. Elizabeth finds this useful. Then Fico, a servant who is strong and does not ask questions. And finally, Catalin Benica, another woman accused of witchcraft who teaches Elizabeth about poisons and pain. Together they create a system. Young girls are recruited from nearby villages. The promise is always the same. Come work at the castle, learn skills, earn good money, send wages back to your starving family. For poor families, this seems like salvation. They send their daughters eagerly. 14-year-old girls, 15, 16. They arrive at the castle excited, nervous, hoping for a better life. Most of them never leave. What happens in the castle stays hidden for years. The walls are thick. The servants are terrified. Anyone who speaks out disappears. But stories leak out anyway. A girl who escapes and runs home with burns covering her arms. A body found in the river with marks that look like torture. A servant who whispers to a priest that girls are dying in the castle and nobody knows why. But nothing happens. Because Elizabeth Bathory is untouchable. She is nobility. She is related to kings. She owns the judges. She controls the local priests. Who will believe a peasant over a countess? The methods become more elaborate. Elizabeth does not just hit anymore. She experiments. She uses needles, hot irons, ice water in winter, starvation, sleep deprivation. She forces girls to stand naked in the snow until they collapse. She burns them with candles and heated coins. She uses devices that crush fingers and toes. And according to later testimony, she does something else. She bathes in their blood. This is the detail that makes Elizabeth Bathory famous centuries later. The legend of the Blood Countess who believed bathing in virgin blood would keep her young forever. But here is the question nobody can answer definitively. Did the bloodbaths actually happen? The testimony comes from servants who were tortured themselves before they confessed. The stories are added to over time, becoming more elaborate with each retelling. By the 1800s, writers are describing Elizabeth lounging in bathtubs filled with blood like it is a spa treatment. But the original court documents from 1611 mention torture and murder. They do not mention blood baths. So where does the legend come from? Is it real? Or is it a myth created to make Elizabeth seem even more monstrous? A woman torturing servants is bad, but a woman bathing in their blood, that is the stuff of nightmares. That is a story that sells. What we know for certain is this: girls died. Many girls. The exact number is disputed, but even the most conservative estimates say at least 80 victims. Some testimonies claim 650. The truth is probably somewhere in between. We also know that Elizabeth was careful. She buried bodies secretly. She paid people to stay quiet. She moved locations when one area became too suspicious. For 20 years, she gets away with it because she is smart enough to only target peasant girls. Poor girls. Girls nobody will miss. Girls whose parents cannot demand justice because they have no power. But then Elizabeth makes a fatal mistake. The year is 1609. She is 49 years old. She has been torturing and killing for over 2 decades. And maybe she is bored with peasant girls. Maybe she wants a greater challenge. Or maybe she just becomes careless. She starts taking daughters of lower nobility, girls from families that have some money, some connections, some ability to complain. And these families do complain. They write letters, they go to local authorities, they demand investigations. The complaints reach King Matthias II. And this is where the story gets complicated. Because, yes, the king is horrified by the accusations, but he is also very interested in Elizabeth's wealth. Elizabeth has been lending enormous sums of money to the crown to finance wars. The king owes her debts he cannot possibly repay, debts that grow larger every year with interest. But if Elizabeth is proven to be a criminal, if she is arrested and convicted, then the debts disappear. Her property could be seized, her castles could transfer to the crown. It is a perfect solution to a very expensive problem. The king orders an investigation. He sends a Lutheran minister named Istvan Magyari to collect evidence. Magyari is thorough. He interviews servants who escaped, he talks to villagers, he documents every accusation. The evidence he compiles is damning. Dozens of witnesses describe the same horrors. Girls tortured, girls killed, bodies buried in secret. The investigation takes months. And finally, in December 1610, the king gives the order. Arrest Elizabeth Bathory and everyone who helped her. But there is one condition. Elizabeth herself must never stand trial publicly. She is a Bathory. She is related to royalty across Europe. A public trial would be a scandal that could damage diplomatic relationships. It would embarrass powerful families. It would raise uncomfortable questions about what other nobles are doing to their servants. So the plan is simple. Arrest her quietly, get confessions from her accomplices, execute them publicly as a warning. But Elizabeth herself, she will simply disappear. December 30th, 1610. Count Georgi Thurzo and his soldiers storm Čachtice Castle. What they find becomes the stuff of nightmares. In the dungeons there are girls, some dead, some dying, some with injuries so severe they will never recover. The soldiers are hardened men who have seen war, but even they turn pale at what they witness. Thurzo writes in his report that the scene is beyond description. He calls it evidence of ungodly cruelty, but he also makes one thing very clear in his letter to the king. Elizabeth herself must never face public judgment. The accomplices are arrested immediately. Ilona Jo, Dorothea Sentes, Fico, Catalin Benica. They are thrown into cells. They will be interrogated, tortured until they confess, used as scapegoats for crimes that Elizabeth herself ordered. Elizabeth is not arrested. She is placed under house arrest in her own castle, confined to her private rooms, guards posted outside, but she is still treated with the respect due to her rank, still fed from fine plates, still addressed as my lady, because even now, even after everything, she is nobility. And nobility does not go to prison like common criminals. January 2nd, 1611. The trial begins. But it is not Elizabeth's trial. It is the trial of her servants. The courtroom is packed. Everyone wants to see justice done. The prosecution calls witness after witness, a woman whose daughter disappeared after going to work at the castle, a priest who was asked to perform secret burials without being told how the girls died, a village elder who says 30 girls from his village alone never came home, a servant who escaped and describes torture chambers beneath the castle. The testimony goes on for days. The numbers that emerge are staggering. Some witnesses say they saw Elizabeth torture and kill 80 girls. Others claim 100. A few say they heard the number was over 600. Catalin Benica testifies that she personally helped bury 50 bodies. Another witness describes a book where Elizabeth recorded the names of her victims like keeping score in a game. But this book is never found. If it existed, it disappeared, destroyed, hidden, lost to history. Without it, we will never know the true number. The testimony is graphic. Witnesses describe beatings, burnings, starvation, girls left to freeze to death, girls tortured with hot irons, girls mutilated with scissors and knives. But here is what is interesting. The testimony about bloodbaths is minimal. Only 1 or 2 witnesses mention anything about Elizabeth bathing in blood. Most of the testimony focuses on straightforward torture and murder. The bloodbath legend that makes Elizabeth famous centuries later seems to be a later addition to the story, something that grows in the retelling, something that makes the tale more sensational, more horrifying, more memorable. The verdict comes quickly. Ilona Jo and Dorothea Sentes are sentenced to have their fingers torn out with hot pincers, then thrown alive into fire. The sentence is carried out immediately in the town square. Hundreds watch as the 2 women scream. Fico is judged to be less culpable because he is young and may have been coerced. He is beheaded first, then his body is burned, a mercy compared to the others. Catalin Benica escapes execution because she is old and sick. She dies in prison months later. Throughout the entire trial, Elizabeth's name is barely mentioned in official records. The court refers to her obliquely, the lady, the mistress, the one who gave orders, but they do not call her by name. They do not summon her to testify. They do not allow her to defend herself or present evidence. Why? Because King Matthias has made it clear. This trial is about punishing servants, not about judging nobility. Elizabeth Bathory's guilt is assumed but never officially declared. It is a trial designed to satisfy public outrage without actually challenging the social order. After the trial, Elizabeth is sentenced without a trial. The king orders her walled up in Čachtice Castle. Masons arrive and begin sealing her rooms. They brick up the windows. They brick up the doors. They leave only small slits for food and air to pass through. Elizabeth will spend the rest of her life in these rooms. No visitors, no sunlight, no contact with the outside world except for guards who slide food through openings and take away waste. It is a living tomb. Solitary confinement in an age before anyone had a name for such punishment. Elizabeth Bathory spends 4 years in that darkness. 4 years alone with her thoughts. We do not know what she thinks about. Does she feel remorse? Does she believe she did anything wrong? Does she understand why she is being punished? The guards who bring her food report that she seems calm. She does not rage or weep or beg. She simply exists. Waiting. For 4 years she waits. August 21st, 1614. A guard slides food through the opening and gets no response. He calls for help. They break down enough of the wall to enter. Elizabeth Bathory is lying on her bed, dead. She is 54 years old. The cause of death is listed as natural causes. But what does natural mean when you have been entombed alive for 4 years? Her body is prepared for burial at night in secret. No funeral, no ceremony, no announcement. She is taken from the castle under cover of darkness and buried in an unmarked location. Even today, historians debate where she is buried. Some say the church in Čachtice. Others say she was moved. Her grave has never been definitively found. And here is where the story becomes even stranger. After Elizabeth's death, her family works to erase her from history. They burn documents. They remove her name from family trees. They forbid anyone from speaking about her. King Matthias declares that even mentioning her name is a crime. For 100 years, Elizabeth Bathory becomes a ghost, a story people whisper about but never discuss openly. It is not until the 1700s that historians begin piecing together what happened, and by then the legend has grown far beyond the facts. So what is the truth? Was Elizabeth Bathory the bloodiest serial killer in history? Or was she a powerful woman destroyed by a king who wanted her money? The answer is probably both. The evidence suggests Elizabeth did torture and kill servants. Multiple independent witnesses who had no reason to lie testified to this. Girls disappeared. Bodies were found. The violence was real. But the numbers were likely exaggerated. 650 victims seems impossible to hide, even for someone as powerful as Elizabeth. The more realistic estimate is probably between 80 and 150 deaths over 25 years. Still monstrous, still horrifying, but not quite the legend. The bloodbath story is almost certainly a myth. It appears nowhere in contemporary accounts. It only shows up in writings from the 1800s when Gothic horror was popular and writers were looking for sensational stories. The image of Elizabeth bathing in virgin blood to stay young forever is too perfect, too symbolic, too much like a fairy tale. It probably never happened. But it is the detail everyone remembers because it transforms Elizabeth from a cruel aristocrat into something supernatural. A vampire, a monster, a cautionary tale about vanity and evil. Here is what we can say with certainty. Elizabeth Bathory was a product of her time and class. She was raised in a world where aristocrats had absolute power over the poor, where human life had different values depending on your birth, where violence was normal and torture was an accepted form of punishment. She was also likely mentally ill. The inbreeding in her family, the violence she witnessed as a child, the isolation and power she had as an adult. All of this created the perfect conditions for cruelty to flourish. She was not born a monster. She was made into one by a system that gave her unlimited power and no accountability. But she was also convenient. A woman with too much power, too much money, too much independence. In an age when women were supposed to be controlled by fathers and husbands, Elizabeth controlled herself. She owned property. She made decisions. She challenged male authority. And when the king needed her money, he had the perfect excuse to take everything. Accuse her of monstrous crimes. Wall her up without trial. Wait for her to die. Problem solved. So Elizabeth is both guilty and a victim, a killer and a pawn, a monster created by her world and destroyed by it. What do you think? Was Elizabeth Bathory evil from birth, or did her world create her? Did she deserve a public trial, or was the king right to hide her away? Would she have been a killer if she had been born poor? Would anyone have cared about dead peasant girls if a man had been killing them instead of a woman? These questions matter because they are not just about the past. They are about power, about who gets to define justice, about what happens when some lives are valued more than others. Elizabeth Bathory died in darkness, but her story refuses to stay buried. It keeps coming back because it asks uncomfortable questions about human nature. about what any of us might become if we had absolute power and no consequences, about the line between punishment and torture, between justice and revenge, between history and legend. Her story survives not because she bathed in blood, but because she represents something we still struggle with today: the corruption that comes with unchecked power, the cruelty that hides behind respectability, the monsters we create when we build systems that treat some people as less than human. Write in the comments what you believe. Was she the victim of a political conspiracy or the most dangerous woman who ever lived? And subscribe to this channel because history hides more secrets than we imagine. Stories that make us question everything we think we know about good and evil, about power and justice, about who gets to tell the story and who gets erased from it. Elizabeth Bathory died alone in a sealed room, but her truth, whatever it really was, still echoes through the centuries, still demanding that we look at it, still refusing to let us look away.